My name is Nisha LeBlanc. I am the president and CEO of Lennox and Gray, and I would like to welcome everyone to our Speakeasy with Black Wall Street. Today we have a great conversation around Durham and learning more about everyone's perspective, their leadership, and their thoughtfulness in terms of where Durham is going. Would like to thank POR once again for our setup for today, and also would like to thank our sponsorship by the Greater Durham Chamber. All right, we're going to go ahead and kick it off. And actually, if you don't mind, Carl, I'm going to let you start. We're going to do our introductions here.
How much time do I have?
Just quick one,
yeah. So Carl Rist, running for City Council at large. We've been to so many forums and they have pretty careful timelines. I'm a 30-year resident of Durham. You all have heard my story before many times. 30-year resident of Durham. Came here to attend graduate school at Duke University to study public policy because I wanted to address the issues I care about, which are poverty, jobs, wages, at a much larger scale at a policy level. I've worked for almost 30 years for a DC-based nonprofit focusing on issues of economic opportunity, financial security, again, jobs, wealth building for families. And so that's the kind of lens I bring to this work. While I was doing that work around the country, I also got deeply involved in civic life in Durham and have been involved in founding the Living Wage Project in Durham. I've been a board member of Self-Help, NC Child, and so I've been involved in the civic life of Durham, especially with the People's Alliance, where I've been a leader and a volunteer. I love living in Durham. It's a great place to be. We got great jobs here, but I'm also concerned that so many people 1 in 7 people are in poverty, 1 in 4 kids are food insecure, and so we've got to push back against those trends, and that's why I'm running for City Council.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Javier Caballero. Thanks for having me again. I've done this, so looking forward to the conversation. I'm a Durham City Council member right now, and I've been on since 2018. I was originally appointed in 2018 and then ran for election in 2019 and won. Moved to Durham in 2010, have 3 kids. We're really fortunate to land in Durham after several moves with small children, and decided that this was an amazing community. And as an immigrant and someone married to a military brat, being able to raise kids in one community was a privilege that neither my husband or I had. And so we really wanted to be able to commit to a place, and Durham was that place, and it's been just an incredible place to raise a family and build community. So wanted to give back when I originally decided to appoint, and have been really fortunate to be able to push forward really bold progressive policies while on council. I've been on council while we pushed forward the largest affordable housing bond in North Carolina history, created the community safety department, and really pushed our trajectory around community safety really in a different way than a lot of other communities. Excited to be here.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Khalil Kareem, and I'm also running for Durham City Council at large. I've been here for about 9 years, and in that time, I've been able to build my family here. I've been able to get married in the state, and I've also been able to build real community that I've been able to feel seen and heard in. I'm running because I want that Durham for everybody. I want a Durham that actually lifts up all of his residents to have the resources it needs to succeed and to thrive. And we do that by paying attention to wages, to the economy, by making sure the things that we do have control over, we set high standards for, so we can push other people to pay wages that are livable. We do that by building strong, healthy communities, and we do that through actually putting our people first and then actually investing in them and do resources through our after-school programs, our rec centers. We actually worry about our environment, and we try to build the city to be a little bit more connected by being multimodal. That means connecting the city through bike lanes, green pathways, sidewalks, making sure that there's a way for everyone to get around that's not actually car-centric, so that's actually adding to pollution. And as we know, environmental harms usually show up in Black and brown communities more than anyone else that in there already overburdened. So I want to run to make sure all the things that keep me here are reasons people get to stay here too.
Hello Durham, and it is such an honor to be here with these candidates. We're kind of like family because we've been running together for the last couple of weeks, but we're all very passionate about making sure that Durham is a place that people can play, live, and work. I am Councilwoman Dr. Monique Colsley-Hyman. I was appointed to City Council in May of 2022, so I have a colleague that actually voted for me here. And I was so excited because I think that I bring that perspective of the person and environment. I have about 30 years of social work experience, clinical, direct community action, and then 18 years of higher ed. And when I actually came to Durham in 2006, I kind of hit the ground running, was appointed to the Durham Mental Health Board, to the Alliance Board, so I saw that transition, the DSS Board, the Durham Social Services Board, where I presently still sit as just elected as vice president, and Citizens Advisory Board. So I've been doing a lot of things behind the scenes. I'm really a person that really wants to make sure that the people's voice of Durham is heard. And I think that's honestly why I was appointed, because that voice was missing. And I also have, since I've been on the council, I think that what I do is make sure that we are actively listening to the community. Without the community, there is no Durham. And I think we have to be real realistic of that. So I'm running to keep my seat. I want to do some more work. I still got a lot of energy left. I want us to continue to work on, I don't like the word affordable, sustainable housing, environmental justice, crime, and public safety. As my colleague said, she's worked on the Hearts program, and so when I got on council, I was so excited that people had that innovative strategy to actually put social workers in the field with the police. And so one of the things I did was be able to get our NCCU, because I didn't say I'm a professor at NCCU, so ego pride, but be able to get our social work department to be able to have interns in that program, and that worked wonderfully. And so I'm just so passionate about making sure that we have somebody at the table that's gonna, number one, treat the residents with respect, number two, push their agenda. And that's what I do. So I'm hoping to keep my seat. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Nate Baker. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I was born and raised right here in Durham. I'm a proud product of the Durham Public School system, went through Durham Public Schools K through 12. I'm a professional urban planner, and I provide planning and policy and regulatory assistance to city and county governments across the state of North Carolina, up and down the East Coast and around the country. And I've served on the Durham Planning Commission over the past 5 years. I'm currently the senior most member of the 14-member Durham Planning Commission, where over the past 5 years, I've worked to fight against gentrification and displacement, which has been a major issue in our community and neighborhoods across our city, and working to create a new framework for the sprawl that we've been seeing. We've seen over almost 10 square miles of sprawl on the outskirts of our city just over the past 5 years, trying to reorient that so that we're growing in a smarter, more sustainable, more equitable way that's not entirely car dependent. So I'm running for city council for that reason. I think there are some things that we've done well over the past several years, but I think that there is room for improvement on some key issues, particularly around labor and promoting tenants' rights, and then also around this issue of walkability and making sure that it's easy to do the right thing and more difficult to do things that are unsustainable and inequitable.
Thank you. All right. So I have to say this is full disclosure. My firm focuses on commercial real estate development as well as general contracting. I am going off of the questions that were sourced from our community, but of course our hot topic starts with housing as well as development. So I just needed to say that, but wanted to make sure that we're all aligned, that this was not my personal interest here. This is our community who are asking these questions. So I'm going to start off with our first question here, which is there are multiple perspectives on how Durham should grow to support density. So in the past few weeks, you all have presented plans to remediate this. If you don't mind, if you can just recap your plan and then also share a little bit how you plan to finance it. And sorry, like we said, this is just open conversation, so anyone is welcome to just jump in and share.
Sure, I'll jump in. So when we talk about housing, we should talk about housing in the context of a comprehensive city, a city that involves and includes many different types of uses, many different styles of housing, and is arranged in a pattern that makes it actually walkable. And talking about not just affordable housing, but an affordable lifestyle, an affordable way to live. And also something where we can live great lives. We're not just talking about widgets that we can put onto a graph, but we're talking about communities that we're creating with the housing that we build. So it's important that we talk about housing in that context and talk about housing in terms of neighborhoods. So we should be creating complete neighborhoods where people can get to the things that they need on a daily basis. That's absolutely critical. And as we grow outward, we need to make sure that we're planning and developing a city that's built around walkability, that's built around transit, that is incorporating and weaving in elements of multimodal transportation and bikeability. That's not something that we've been doing, so we need to change in order to do that. Part of that is going to be in the Unified Development Ordinance rewrite, making it easy to do the right thing while prohibiting or making it extremely difficult to do the wrong thing, which is continued cars and traffic, building for cars and traffic rather than people and places. In terms of investments, we need to make sure that with our limited public dollars that we are using those towards those at the very bottom. So the 30% area mean income and below, and then folks who are unhoused, making sure that we are directing those limited public resources in that area, and working with our development community to incorporate and weave in that 80% area mean income, the workforce housing into private developments. So I think that's all of those pieces together can create a better housing product here in Durham.
One of the things that like I said, I kind of make decisions based on listening to the community and putting their concerns at the forefront of every decision I've made on city council. But I think we really have to also be creative. I'm also the regional director for North Carolina for the NBC Leo. And so I like to go to a lot of different conferences and learn. And so I will say that we have to be creative in terms of strategies for housing. And I'm not going to say affordable housing. I'm talking about sustainable housing. I recently did some research, I think it was New Jersey, that did like a one-stop shop. So they had people, you can come into that area, particular building, and you could get services for homelessness, you can get services for human services, health. It was a one-stop shop. And in New Jersey, what happened was, because they had all of these services in one place, not only did it decrease homelessness, but it also increased people getting services. So we've got to think very creative, and that's where my social work hat comes in. And I know people said this is city, but we got a lot of kids in the city that are dying. We got a lot of people in the city that need, housing, and all those things we do as social workers. I always get like, that should be county. No, we got to put some of this. We got to work together. Which I love the fact that I'm still have my feet in the county situation as vice president of the DSS board. One of the things I've learned over the last 18 months is you got to plan. And so when I first was appointed, I was not privy to being involved with the budget planning. But then I did this last budget be able to put some things in, but I was still learning. But if I am reelected, we're gonna have to do creative thinking around the money that we need in pre-budget around the affordable housing piece. I think that we're not doing a good job at that. We wait, some people will wait till later, community will come and tell us what they need, but we've got to start using that pre-budget piece and budgetary planning ahead of time. One of the things, I have one-on-ones with the city manager, and recently we had a one-on-one, and I keep asking, how many city properties do we own? Because my idea is creative, thinking outside the box. How can we get some of those city properties to be able to work with builders who want to do things around affordable housing, sustainable housing? And I was just told that there are proposals out right now with looking at some of our city properties to be able to work on that particular project, which is looking at our city properties that we have and really actually doing an RFP. There are 2 out right now, and I know we've been talking about it. I know our other colleague that was with us, Sheila Huggins, had been talking about it. So I said, you know what, let me ask, and that's what I just found out, that we literally have 2 proposals right now that are out in the community looking for developers to work with the city on city-owned property to turn that into affordable housing. So that's what I'm talking about, creative strategies, because it can be done because other cities are doing it, but we've got to think outside the box. Thank you.
I think a lot of us are going to agree that we really need to invest in a really good comprehensive plan, because as we start to build out, as Nate said earlier, we need to make sure we have these cities that people can have access to everything in, that they're walkable, they can go to jobs, they can schools, groceries, all these things, so they can be a part of society and not a part of society because they don't have access to transportation or money to buy a car or things like this. So we really need to be proactive in thinking of our residents first when we do anything. And so how we do that is we think about availability and what they can actually buy, and we start thinking about, that's what she said, what do we have? What do we have as a city that we own? And we think about our city land, because that's somewhere we can start building that will be cheaper. And I say we go a little bit farther. What are the county land that we own? Like, what are all land that we own that we can work together to build on to make this cheaper? And so what we need to think about when we think about housing in the future, instead of thinking about Oh, developers, we just need to go in automatically thinking this is what this is about. It's not about this developer. It's about this development is going to bring me this much of like affordable housing. If not, then that developer doesn't get anything. There's a lot of smaller developers here that want to build smaller, want to build these ADUs for your parents to live in your backyard like mine does, so they can age in place and you can have care. And we can do that. We need to stop looking for the easiest option, but what's the option that's going to actually affect people here? Yeah.
Thank you for the question. So a couple things. What the city has done, we just passed our comprehensive planning. I think the county's already done it, and the city council just passed ours on Monday, and that place type map is critically important about our vision for how we want to develop. And I think many of us are talking about the trend of like a 15-minute city. How do people get around in a city close with like multimodal options, like not having to use a car, either taking mass transit or walking or biking? And so we have made that commitment already as a city and a county. It was 200 public meetings. It was a multi-year process. And so we have that vision. And so the next step of this is how are we going to implement that vision? And so part of it is an affordable housing strategy. We're in the middle of a 5-year forever home strategy, which was the affordable housing bond that we passed in 2019 is included in that plan. But we also know we need to start looking at what's next. And what's next is going to have to include a workforce housing strategy, a lot more alignment with the county and public schools, because everybody owns public land. And so I don't think it makes sense for the county to have something and the city to have something and the schools to have something separate. I think it makes a lot more sense for all of us to get together and talk about it. So that's one component. I think the other big opportunity is going to be with so we passed the comprehensive plan, and next is our UDO rewrite. So our unified development rewrite. Our comp plan is like our vision statement. What do we want? What are our ideas? Our UDO is what are the rules to get us there? And so when we're making those rules, one thing that I'm really, really interested in is creating essentially a process where developers get points. We all can come together as a community, just like we did with our comp plan, about what are the things that we think are important. I consistently hear affordable housing. I also hear about sustainable development practices. A lot of those things, as the local government, we can't force developers to do anything about it, but we can certainly incentivize them. And so we hear from the development community pretty consistently, like, if I could get through the city's process, which is 18 to 24 months, if I could get through that quicker, I could probably give things more consistently. And so I'm really interested in creating like a faster pipeline of projects so that the private market can deliver the kinds of things we need, and then government, which many of the folks here have already named, can deliver the kind of housing product that we know we need for folks in the community who are just not going to be able to afford their own housing for many reasons. They're seniors, they're children, maybe they have disabilities, and we just have to make that commitment, and I think Durham has made that commitment and wants to continue making that commitment.
Thanks for the question. I know you didn't want to go around the horn, but I guess we just did that, didn't we? So, yeah, great question. And as I've been talking to voters during this campaign, the two biggest issues are affordable housing and community safety. So thanks for the question. In fact, some have said during the race, like, the issue is really about SCAD. That's that series of privately initiated text amendments. Some have tried to make this race about SCAD. It's not about SCAD. It's about affordable housing. We need more tools rather than less tools to build affordable housing. So it starts with, as Javier said, starts with the existing bond money we have, the Forever Home program, to execute on that for the promises of that, of rental housing, a permanent supportive housing, but also home ownership, right? There's incentives in there for low-income, first-time home buyers. So in addition to the Forever Home plan, we also need to make sure we have more incentives for first-time home buyers to have a house, but also build generational wealth in a home. That's a piece that is really important to me. And again, I think the plan right now, the way they've created the sort of the second mortgages, I think we're going to serve less people than we thought we would serve initially with Forever Home. So that's number one. Number two is that we got to, and other folks have mentioned this, leverage city-owned land where we have land to leverage maximum benefits for affordable housing. That's a critical thing, given the city land we have, especially in the urban core. Number three is to think about ways we can change the code. Like in SCAD, I don't think anybody here in this panel supports everything in SCAD, but there's pieces of SCAD that are really important that we could think about to change both housing, but also how we organize and how we structure our city. One of them is getting rid of parking minimums, and we've talked a lot about getting rid of, or like creating an incentive away from single car trips, right? So parking minimums is a way, getting rid of parking minimums is a way to disincentivize car trips, right? To increase commercial retail. So that's a big change that SCAD would include. So those kind of changes I think are important. We need to think about that now with SCAD, but also as we get on later, approve the comprehensive plan and do the whole UDO rewrite. We need to be thinking about aggressive ways that we change the code to incentivize the kind of development we want to see in Durham.
You kind of hit on the next point. So as you stated with SCAD, it was brought, in front of City Council, but it was tabled. And so just in terms of the community, their thoughts around this is a lot of the zoning regulations, as you already pointed out. But I guess if we can maybe go a little bit deeper into that, maybe what are some of your proposed thoughts, in regards to the program?
Yeah, so I would say, I'm happy to jump in. Anybody else, feel free to jump in. So, I'll just quickly. So I think the way that SCAD was initiated with a private individual initiating the text amendment is not the way to do process in Durham. So I think that's not correct. I think we want to make that better, that process better. But again, I think there's things in SCAD, the planning staff have said about 85, 90% of the proposals in SCAD make a lot of sense to city planning staff, right? I've mentioned getting rid of parking minimums as number one. Number two, we just had a meeting last week with Durham CAN, and they were talking about the proposal for allowing churches to build multiple dwelling units on their land, more than just three, and they don't have to be just for staff. That's a big change as well that could mean significant impacts for affordable housing. So again, I think leaving apart the sort of the pros and sort of like the proponents and opponents of SCAD, which are numerous, right? But I think that if you dig into the details like CAN did, and I give CAN a lot of credit for really digging into the details, there's a lot of stuff in there that we really should be supporting.
What I'm excited about is because, again, myself and my colleague, where they are now listening to it, and what I'm excited about is the mayor had the initiative to start a task force. And so we have two of our present city council members who are working with a group of community members, some professors, I think at UNC and I think at North Carolina Central, to galvanize the community and to hear the concerns about the community and the concerns about the SCAD proposal. And so I think we should have done that in the beginning. So I'm looking forward to hearing what comes out of that conversation and everybody, bringing everybody to the table. One of the things that I the way that this whole SCAD proposal was actually presented to us, I think was, again, as Carl said, it didn't follow. To me, I'm a strategic person, policy and procedure. And so I think that, and it's also an equitable issue because a lot of people, even myself, would not have the amount of money that some of the people that were involved with SCAD to be able to even come up with this proposal around rezoning and all of that. You just don't have it. So it's certain people that, I always say in North Carolina, in Durham, they are the have and the have-nots. And so we need to be able to make sure that everybody's working together and that everybody's agenda is for the people. So I'm so happy about this task force. I look forward to what's going to come out of it because you're going to have the people at the table to discuss it, to be able to come up with something. Like I said, there are some things that I think that I do agree with, but it was just very, as a present city council member, the document, I think, Nate, was how many pages? It was a big document, and even myself, who I kind of think I'm a little smart, was hard for me to understand it, to be quite honest. So how do you think the people in the community could understand that? So we've got to do better. We've got to do better. So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to chime in. So we have a privately initiated text amendment process. That's been part of the UDO, the Unified Development Ordinance. I'm going to try not to use all the acronyms because it's hard for folks. And that process is available to anyone who wants to pay the fee. There should be, and I think will be, a conversation with the rewrite of the UDO, whether or not that's allowable or not. But just to be clear, and in this framework and for folks watching, anyone can put that forward. If you were an environmental organization and our staff was taking too long and you wanted us to move forward on like a tree save, that nonprofit could have raised the same amount of money and done the same thing. So while I can understand people's concerns with it, it's not a $10,000 or $20,000 fee. It's like a $3,000 or $4,000 fee. I think that there are a lot of nonprofits, if they wanted to, raise the money to pay for something that they wanted to see in our UDO that maybe we were taking too long on. So I do want to put that out there as we can take that power away. We could decide as a community, but it's going to take it away from everyone. And I could see the benefit for some community members or some nonprofits wanting potentially to have that option. I think with SCAD, as everyone said, the part that has always been that I've never really been a fan of and have had a lot of questions around has always been the piece around the affordable housing component and how long is it affordable? Because for the for sale side, there's really nothing. And then on the rental side, it wasn't very deep either. And so I think that's the component that has never really sat well with me. I think the other pieces to what others have said, it is really technical. That's what a UDO is. It's a technical document for the professionals who are in that field. It's not necessarily going to be relatable. It's like me reading a medical textbook, right? I'm not a doctor. If I'm trying to read a medical textbook, I might not understand it. That doesn't mean our next UDO should be so impossible to read, but I think we also need to understand what the intent of that document was. It was for the practitioners in the field, the urban planners, the designers, the structural engineers, to have the rules that they have to design and build by. Should we do something different? Absolutely. So I just wanted to kind of reframe the conversation a little bit about that. I'm excited to see what the task force brings us. It did follow the process. It came to joint city-county planning twice. I sit on JCCPC. It went to us 2 different times, and when we don't like vote, but we say yay or nay as it moving forward in the process. The 2 times it was heard, SCAD was moved forward unanimously to run through the process that it was going to run through for any privately initiated text amendment.
If I'm going to jump in, I know a lot has been said, so I'm kind of just reiterating what people have said already. But when we think about how we develop and how we move here in Durham, we really do need to think about our citizens, and we need to really think about our community. And even though there is a process for the community to evolve, I think I really didn't know that. That's really great. I think more community orgs now need to actually start to step up and really push forward to see the city that they want to see. I think that would be a great idea, because once the community be a part of it, and if the community writes it, then the community benefits. And that's who I want to benefit from these changes. The changes should actually benefit the residents here. And as many people said, Durham Can did a great job of really taking out some of the pieces of the SCAD amendment that I feel are very needed for us to kind of move forward on being able to do affordable housing in a way that we haven't been done before. Because right now we really need to be creative and do new ways and try new avenues, because what we've been doing has only gotten us here, and we need to do more.
Yeah, so I think SCAD is the worst possible way to go about policy making, which is allowing an industry to write the regulations on a large scale for themselves. I'm on the Planning Commission. I talk with developers all the time. I constantly peek behind the curtain of our very old Unified Development Ordinance, and I'm constantly shocked at what we're requiring developers to do. Oftentimes that perpetuate our dependence on the automobile. Lots of small developers who say, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I'm required to do this with the driveway, and all of the different details and pieces in our UDO that are not good for the community, are expensive. So there are a lot of things that we need to change, and a lot of those are deregulatory in nature. This is a massive proposal. It's consumed the public square over the past year and a half. So are we a city that's going to be bottom up, or are we a city that's going to continue to be top down and empower those at the top to be able to shape the conversations that we have? There are so many conversations that we need to have about the Unified Development Ordinance. Why are we having it just about this little corner of the UDO? It should be led and initiated by the people, by our city government. We shouldn't sit back passively and wait for different groups to propose their own changes to the Unified Development Ordinance and pay the $3,500 fee and pay staff to be able to shepherd the process through. We need to have trust in the process. And that means it's got to be initiated and run by a third party that isn't profit motivated. So we need to have those types of people shepherding the process through. As was mentioned earlier, this is very technical in nature. It's very confusing. So we need the people who are shepherding it through to be the communicators of what it actually does, what it's actually intended to do. And that is not at all what SCAD is. So I do think that we should continue to think about, how do we learn what's broken with the Unified Development Ordinance among our development community? They should still be able to propose small changes. That we can't make it perfect all the time. They still need to be able to propose and come in and have a method to be able to say, hey, look, I'm going through the development process. This is a silly requirement. We should change it, and it can go through a very transparent process. But we need to do those on a small scale. We need our large scale changes to our policies and regulations, whether it's the UDO or any other major law in our city. That needs to be done proactively by a proactive city government. So that's what I think that we need to focus on city council.
Thank you. And can you all remind me, I think for the task force, is there like an open public session, I think, or involvement, if I'm not
there's
mistaken.
3
I think
meetings,
it's 3
right?
meetings next
Yeah,
Tuesday,
there's-
Wednesday, and Thursday.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and
All
they're
right.
open to the public. They're going to be in the committee room meeting on the 2nd floor of City Hall. My understanding is that it can't be taped. We don't have the capacity in that room, but it is open to the public.
And people can't actually call in like they do for our city council. I'm sorry. People can't actually call in like they do for our work session and regular
Yeah.
city council.
It's not going to be
meeting.
on Zoom too, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
We need you to come out. We need you to come out.
All right. Thank you. All right, so we're going to continue with our housing and development conversation. So we know that multiple factors continue to contribute to the rising home costs. So of course, we've already discussed briefly, but housing affordability has become even more, difficult. And of course, in having our conversations around sustainability in real estate and construction. So what do you all think as far as any local government can impact these businesses and how they're being disrupted by supply chain. So the ability, right, to be able to execute on the vision that you have for Durham, how is that possible when we have, these various economic and industry impacts?
Yeah, so obviously we can't control interest rates. We can't control all of those other factors. That's the easy response. But we can make what we want to have, and I hate to sound like I'm just repeating myself here, but we can make what we want to have happen easy to do. That means making the process easier and the outcome more in line with the values of the people of Durham, which I think want a city that's sustainable and want a city that's transit-oriented and walkable and more equitable. So how can we expedite that kind of outcome? But that requires being proactive. That requires doing the plan. That requires upfront and deep engagement with communities and making sure that we're putting in place the framework, the structure, the legal structure that will result in that kind of outcome. That's going to require upfront planning. So one of the things that I'm advocating for, I talk a lot about what's happening on the edge of our city because those are our large parcels. That's our master plan communities. There aren't very many people out there. There's wildlife out there and there's trees, but there are very many people out there. So that's really an opportunity for us to get it right the first time and make sure that we're building a sustainable city. It's more difficult when we're planning and building in communities where there are already people, where there are people who could be threatened at being pushed out. So we need to, in my view, initiate a small area planning program where, for example, let's take Northgate Mall. Aging mall, there's a lot that could happen with that 55-acre site. Conducting a small area plan and putting in place a vision for that site that can be moved through the process quickly so that there's, right now the developer keeps proposing different things. It's not good to have a system where developers are on their heels and unsure about what they are allowed to do or are not allowed to do. The community has set a vision for that site. We as a city need to be proactive, adopt a small area plan for that site, and look at other communities around Durham and be proactive about what can you do and what can you not do.
So, I'm sorry, a lot of developers, when they come in front of us, they just talk about the fact that they would love to do more affordable and sustainable housing, but they just can't afford to do that, right? And so the developers that do come in front of us that are doing that, because we have some, again, we need to kind of, be able to prioritize, and I hate to say this, but be able to prioritize how do we get other developers to kind of get on the same bandwagon. One of the things that I learned when I got on city council, because, I'm an advocate, social justice is my thing, and I'm like, well, why can't we just tell them we need A, B, C, and D? I need you to give us affordable house, 100 houses, 100 apartments. Well, I learned from my colleagues that we can't do that in Durham because we're a Dillon state, so we can't push that. But we've got some corporations that are coming into Durham, right? People want to come to Durham. So why can't we sit at the table with some of these corporations that are coming into Durham to ask them to be able to do some employment-based training models, some housing models for people who live here and their people coming in. We got to be creative and we got to think outside the box because what we're doing now is not working. And so we've got to be that advocate for what is right. But again, we have to ask for what we want, right? What also I learned is when they come in front of us and they say, okay, we're going to give you 100, well, not even that, maybe $50,000 for a proffer for the Affordable Housing Fund and $30,000 maybe for a proffer for the Board of Education, right? Okay. Well, what I realized is you're giving me $30,000, but that's not even one kid who has special ed needs in the school system, right? We've got to do better. We can't push them, we can't force them, but I think what the council has done right now is to create a culture of advocating for what we need here, and that has to continue.
I'm going to go on a different side. I think you mentioned something about the business aspect of the changing market here, what's happening, especially like around downtown. And I think how we affect that is really being engaged in downtown and actually setting more and more policies like they've already done, to where now restaurants have these outside seating to invite more people in. Now you can actually go to bars downtown and take your drink to DPAC. So it's like this mingling city that you can actually move around and make it walkable and better. And so how we do that is actually being a part of the city and listening to community needs and finding out, how do we build this city to actually be sustainable to the people here? So that means, what are the things we want in these businesses that are coming? What are the things that we need to keep these businesses opening so we can keep going to them, especially during COVID and things like that? How do we keep us still alive and thriving in this economic part? And it's actually by being a part of it and listening to people.
Yeah, that was a great question. So a couple of things. As we know, the employers that are coming often offer a higher wage, and what we have to do and we need to do better at is to ensure that the folks who already live here can also compete for those jobs, because that's a higher. So the flip side of affordability is, can I afford the house, right? So yes, we all know that there are parts of our community that are always going to need support, and we should never feel, folks should never feel like they shouldn't be, like that they don't have the dignity to need that support, and B, we should always have values that support people like that in our community. But I'm talking about folks who have jobs now or are young and are going to be in Durham, and we have to do better as a city and council, or a council and county and schools, so that our kids who are in Durham, who are going to be finishing up in school, know that they can stay in Durham. Like, I have 3 teenagers. I think several of us have kids here, that we want to be able to provide that opportunity for our kids, that they're not going to get priced out of their own community that they were raised in. And so we have to ensure that the jobs that are going to be paying higher wages, that the folks in Durham can also access those jobs. I know Durham Tech has done some really fantastic work, and the city has to be really, really aligned with their vision and what the county is really promoting. And I would say right now we'd have to do a lot of improvement to make that alignment a reality.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And as others said, Nate and others, like, we can't control supply chains here in Durham. Can't control mortgage rates that are just kind of, I heard just on the news today, kind of ticking up still. So we can't control that. But what I will say, just a couple points, so that, just framing this broadly, again, we're in the middle of an affordable housing crisis here in Durham. We need to really address that. And so I think there's a tension here that I want to name between the kind of process, planning, public engagement that we need to do to get the UDO right in down the road, right? But there's also things we can do now. And builders are saying, look, as you said, make it easier for me to build dense stuff in town, right? And so I think there's a need to think about, what are the parts, going back to SCAD, that we can do now, that the planning staff says makes sense now, do those now, because the UDO rewrite's going to take what? It's going to take a couple years, right? And so that's a lot of time where people are looking for affordable housing. So I think we need to figure out what's the balance between doing things now that make sense and then waiting for the UDO rewrite to do things we want to do and think more about in the future, right? So that's an important tension. The other thing I'll say is that, and other folks have mentioned big corporations, right? So we got Apple's coming here, Amazon and others. So those big tech firms in Silicon Valley have provided, I think, a big, huge, multi-million-dollar fund to local community to build housing. I think as those folks are bringing workers here, as Javier said, who come here with education, with high incomes and can demand housing here and are pushing up prices here, I think we need to go to some of those big corporations and ask them to contribute here as well to a big fund for affordable housing.
Right. Well, thank you all. We're now going to transition to transportation. We've kind of touched on it a little bit here, but with Durham's growing population, the community is obviously seeking some solutions. And so with that, curious, what are your solutions and how are you going to prioritize those?
I'm trying to keep us away from we're just going to keep going around.
And I'll go next.
So transit is something that I have worked on. I'm just going to be, sometimes when you join council, you have to learn about things that, I was an educator. I could have told you all about public policy around public education across the country. I was a consultant. I worked in lots of different communities. I did not know I was going to learn about water systems, transit systems, a lot of these things. And it's great. I mean, that you're lucky enough. I like to learn new things. So that's been, transit is one of the things that I've had to learn a lot about, because I'm a member of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, our regional transit board that the federal government sets for us. And so our board, our MPO, is with communities in Orange County and in Chatham. And so I was on the MPO when we set a different vision for our, what we call our 2050 master planning, transit planning, our MTP. And so we know we want a different future. We know we want a less car-centric future. We're going to need bus rapid transit to deliver that. We're going to need regional rail to deliver that. I'm not going to use commuter rail because we've all decided that that is a model that doesn't really work for our community. We're going to have to keep funding Go Durham the way we are funding it and expanding it so that we have an excellent local bus system. And we're going to have to keep building sidewalks, expanding our sidewalk infrastructure and our bike infrastructure so that we can accomplish the thing that we said we wanted in our comp plan, which is we want 15-minute communities, 15-minute cities. You know, people can really get around. And that's for local, but then the other part of that is that regional piece, the BRT, the bus rapid transit, and the rail. Because we also know that there are folks here in Durham that work in Wake, or they work in Orange, and we want the folks who work in Wake to maybe want to buy in Durham. And they're not going to do that if they're not able to commute between communities. So everything around transit has to be really, really done well locally, but also being excellent regional partners with Wake and Orange especially.
I'll go. For the last 5 years, I've been working with North Carolina League of Conservation Voter Foundation, and we've really been trying to think about ways to be a little bit more sustainable, and that's pushing away from our car-centric society and model that we go by right now. We do that by having multimodal transportation, by having sidewalks, bike lanes, pathways, ways that connect to city that doesn't really use a car-centric view. And transit, like bus rapid transit, is a good way to do that because then you have one centralized place that's usually doing the pollution, but actually a lot of our buses now are being transferred over to electric power, so we can change that source too, so we can make it less pollution in our communities. Because a lot of times when we think about car-centric places, a lot of that pollution shows up only in certain neighborhoods. And so we want to make sure that everyone's living a healthy lifestyle, it's free of pollution in the air, and we got to build that by actually pushing away, a just transition away from using cars. That means we need to push away from these fossil fuel industries into an industry that actually is we can replenish and regenerative instead of extractive. And right now we're in an extractive economy that we take resources, we take labor. And so what we need to do is be regenerative to where we can replenish the land that we take from and we replenish the people who do the work.
So when I was appointed, I think they were talking about, in terms of transportation, monies that were put in, I think was for commuter rail, I think it was. And so it was like millions of dollars that was lost. Was it how many? It was a lot of money. The light rail, but it was like millions of dollars. And I'm thinking about what can I do with that money? You know, especially for the people here in Durham. So what I want moving forward is for us to really make sure we do a proper needs assessment of what actually can be sustainable here in terms of transportation. And I'm also on the Mayor's Committee for People with Disabilities. As my colleagues say, we are appointed to different committees. And one of the things that we're fighting for right now is accessibility for our people with disabilities. I've got people that email me and say they're standing in the ditch to find a bus. There's no shelter for them. There's no way that maybe somebody's wheelchair can kind of get onto a bus. All those things, I'm still talking about the people, right? That's where my mindset is. And so we've got to do things that are going to, first of all, be accessible for our people here, but we also can't waste any more money. So I need the right people at the table to do this needs assessment of what is going to happen here in Durham in terms of transportation. Because when I think about the millions of dollars, I'm also a mom, and I also know how to take Peter to pay Paul. That's how I grew up. And I'm like, what I could have done with that money. So we've got to be creative, but we've got to have the right people up at the table to make sure we have a needs assessment and a sustainable plan for transportation. And not forgetting my people with disabilities.
Yeah, so housing is the number one expense for households. Transportation is the number two expense, either that or healthcare. So transportation, the way people get around, is absolutely critical for thinking about the future of our city. And it's an area where we actually have a lot of control. There's a lot of things that we don't have control over. The way people get around is really important. Only 4% of our residents here in Durham, of our workers, are able to get to work without a private vehicle. Private vehicles are huge expenses, in particular for those at the bottom of the income spectrum, and those who can't afford cars. We get them stuck in buses in traffic. So we have to have a great transit system, local transit system. We need to work to try and maintain our free bus service. And make sure that expense is low for our folks who regularly take the bus. We need bus rapid transit. It is an amazing form of transportation. It's a great way to get around very quickly across town and between some of the local municipalities. It's a really, really important form of transportation, and we have to have honest conversations about the design of our streets. Corridor plans are essential, and cities across North Carolina are implementing those. Durham doesn't do corridor planning, and we have to start doing corridor planning, because that combines the infrastructure of the street and the street design with the land use and adjacent buildings, and the way that they interface one another. So that's absolutely critical. We need to make sure that we're prioritizing multiple modes of transportation. It's really about freedom. Do people have options about the way that they get around, and expanding the freedom of people's accessibility to be able to navigate the city? And the elephant in the room is the amount of sprawl, the auto-oriented sprawl that we continue to approve regularly on the outskirts of our city, which is having which will have very, very long-term detrimental impacts in terms of being able to expand transportation options for people. So we need to have very honest conversations about those approvals that have been happening and how we can change the framework for how we develop and how we grow in our city, so that we're growing in a way. It's easier to build right the first time than to go and try and fix things that are already on the ground. We're building things right the first time, so that we're building for transit, we're building for walkability, and we're building the best possible bicycle infrastructure system that we possibly can. And then we need a complete streets plan, so that we are bringing in the bike advocates and the bike experts and walkers and those in social justice community, so that when we redevelop our streets, we're doing it in a way that is good for everybody.
So great question. Yes, and transportation is one of the key local government responsibilities. The city does a survey every year of the residents and their satisfaction with city services, and consistently the city gets dinged for streets, bike paths, sidewalks, and stuff. We need to do better about that. So let me start with a story, and then I'm going to echo some of the themes that Javier mentioned. First thing is, as you know, I biked over here. I'm glad I got here on time. I was almost late. So I biked down my street, which is one of the bike routes in Durham, right? It's pretty minimal, right? There's sharrows, what are called sharrows, those little things on the road that sort of an arrow with bikes. It's got some signs that say bike route. That's it, right? And so I've been in other communities that have separate bike lanes where people, on East Main Street, that give riders much more comfort than when they ride. They're a little safer from cars. So we can do way better with our bike lanes for one thing. As Javier said, the 15-minute city concept is really powerful. So we need to start with sidewalks, bike lanes, greenways, so people can get around to these important nodes to access buses like fare-free buses like the council has done. We need to continue fare-free buses. We need to continue the work of the Vision Zero coordinator that the city just funded, so that when people are getting around by foot or by bike, that they're not in danger of being really injured or dying, right? It's really critical. And then beyond that, we need, and as Dr. Halsey-Hyman said, we need to have bus shelters. So when people are waiting for the bus, it's all weather. You can wait there and not worry about getting soaked, right? Then in addition to those local forms of transportation, as other folks have said here, we need to have bus rapid transit to get around Durham much more efficiently, right? So that's a great way we can do that. I want to make sure that as we're developing the community out on 70 and also 15501, I know the state wants to make that big freeways. I think our local plan says, let's make that bus rapid transit. We need to do that. The last thing is, transportation is about not only mobility for people, right, but it's also about economic development. I know that was one of the questions on your list. It's critical part of the infrastructure for this region that we have strong transportation and ways to get from our big employment centers, Durham, the Park, and Raleigh. And so, conventional commuter rail is off the table, right? But some form of regional rail using existing lines with maybe shorter trains that are more frequent is a critical way to get people not only for enjoyment and so forth, but also to get to job centers. It's an important social mobility tool so that people can get to jobs in the Park and Raleigh. So we need to do that. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but we need to build towards that regional rail.
Thank you. Thank you all. All right. So we're down to our last 5 minutes here. It did. So let's end our time here with one last question, and we're going to talk a little bit about safety. We know this is, like I said, one of the key questions, within our community, and so sort of a two-part question here, but one is, does Durham need to expand its police force? And then secondly, with that, what measures do you believe the city council can take in order to help lower crime and or partnering with our police force?
Just to the first question, we are already, and folks mention the vacancy rate constantly in Durham. That is a national trend. That is not just Durham. We offer a $10,000 signing bonus, and if you live, I forgot what the mile radius is, maybe it's 50 miles, you also get $3,000 to move. We're also doing a comprehensive pay study, next year that will again improve our salaries, not just for our police officers, but for every single city employee, and that's critical to, entice talent here and get folks to stay. There's just been a big shift, and I think it just needs to be named, around folks choosing to be police officers. So what we know about the Durham Police Department is a lot of the folks who've been there are staying, but the average police officer works for 20 years. They can retire after 20 years, and so they are retiring, and we're not able to keep up with the newer hires. So I think we need to pay our police officers really well, just like I believe we need to pay every city worker, but I think that's where the work of the community safety department is becoming so critical. This past year, we were really lucky. There was a bill passed by the General Assembly that was bipartisan, which is rare these days in the General Assembly, realizing that this issue around police officer vacancies is big, not just in Durham, but it's critical in many communities in North Carolina. And so now we're going to be able to do civilian traffic enforcement. And our community safety department and our police department is already working on, we do not need to send an armed police officer to do a traffic report for you because you got an offender bender, and it helps them really focus on what we need them to do, which is to focus on violent crime. I think the violent crime that our community sees, especially the shootings and homicides, is what I know scares me the most, and I know it's what every single resident, it scares them the most too. So I think really letting our police department focus on that core function for them, ensuring that they're paid well, but then being able to take the parts of their job off their plate and putting it in other resources, I think is going to be the way forward, and I think that that's what a lot of communities, not just in Durham, but across the U.S., are going to be faced with.
I would have to agree. I don't think right now we have so many vacancies that we just need to fill it, to be honest, to see what we can do actually at capacity. Before we expand, I really like how we already are thinking outside the box to stop over-policing in neighborhoods by creating programs like the HEART program that send in mental health practitioners and during calls that don't need an armed response, just like Javier said. I think this way, even though I'm gonna switch it a little bit, when we think about crime, a lot of times people think about the police, but they come afterwards. They're the crime solvers. They're not the preventative measure. And when we want to think about crime and how do we stop crime in our communities, we need to think about preventative measures. We need to think about what are the root problems of this. And a lot of times it's poverty, it's homelessness, it's needing mental health, not all the time, but these are things that we can be proactive in and invest in and fund so we can try to disrupt what the crime rate is afterwards.
Yeah, so, I really think that we have to be, again, creative. And so I'm just honored to say that since I was appointed and hitting the ground running when I was, a lot of the city employees would come and talk to me. And I think that's because I'm a social worker, but I also think it's because I try to have a good spirit. And they were talking about their concerns of they feel sometimes not being validated, not only with salary, but just the fact that you're doing a good job. And so I was one of the council members that in the beginning wanted to make sure that they got an increase. And I'm just very honored to say that I did get endorsed, the only person running that got endorsed by the Firefighters Union, and I'm also someone who's got endorsed by the City Employees Union. So, when I was growing up in the South Bronx as a little girl, it was an honor to be a police officer and a firefighter. I mean, that's just what you did if you didn't want to go to college. But I think we've got to also start at a younger age and get them and just get them excited about being police officers. One of the things that I've tried to do is link my NCCU criminal justice department to our chief of police, who's also an Eagle, and just trying to get her, and I know she's very creative in doing recruitment and strategies, but kind of coming into the colleges and kind of saying you can come and be a police officer, starting at the elementary schools, and kind of get that, I'm going to say, sexiness back about being a police officer and a firefighter. And then I'm going to also switch in terms of the crime. Right? There is a theoretical framework, and I teach human behavior too, but there's a theoretical framework, Maslow's hierarchy of need. And it talks about people not having, if you don't have the basic needs, like my colleague said here, housing, food, shelter. You don't seem to be able to kind of reach that higher level of functioning. And so we've got to be creative, which is why I love the fact that this is something that was already happening when I came in, the HEART program. I also was an advocate to expand, along with other colleagues, to expand the HEART program, but I wanted to go a little further. I want to expand that aftercare piece. So the aftercare, if you have like somebody come out, the police are called, and there's someone that's going through a suicidal ideation. The fact now we have social workers on the team to be able to handle that is just awesome to me. But also making sure that we have that aftercare piece, because if somebody's coming out to help me, there's a family, right, that might need some other services. So I want to see some more, if blessed to be able to be reappointed, get my seat back because I was appointed, but to actually run now, right? I really want to see some more work around that aftercare piece. And I know that's county, but we have a lot of things that we can do creatively to work with the county to move these things forward. But I mean, we got to also start with the youth. When I was little, there was a little dog that used to come around to the schools, talk about, youth and staying out of bullying and all those things. We got to get back to those grassroots, just kind of programs to start with our youth. I have a lot of kids. I was telling somebody the other day about my central students, talk about there's a plug here, there's a plug there. I mean, I didn't even know what a plug was, but there's like this underlying ground of there's people who are actually in the, I would say, community, like underground life is, that are actually funding some of our kids with these guns. And it's like that kind of dark market that we don't know about. And those are the people, I guess, who are the plugs that my students are telling me about, because they know where everything is, right? We've got to start where they're at. We got to hear these kids. We got to know where they're at. And we've got to put also, I know it's county, but we got to also put these mentoring programs in action to start little, because these kids are our future, and we've got to educate them, and we got to listen to them. We don't listen. We got to listen to them, and we've got to put these services in. Thank you.
So great question, and I've got a couple of thoughts on that. As I said, community safety and housing are the two biggest issues that people are talking about in this campaign. So with respect to police, yeah, I think we need to fill the vacancies we have, and that means pay. I know we have the pay study coming up. We need to make sure they're paid at market. We all hear stories about how we train police well here in Durham, and then they go to other communities. So we got to make sure the pay is competitive with the market. Number two, the city of Charlotte has a first-time responder first-time homebuyer assistance for first responders and teachers. We should think about special assistance for these first responders, police officers, and others to buy homes in Durham so they can live here like all of us do and thrive here. So that's another thing we can do to make it more attractive to be a police officer in Durham. We've talked a lot about this whole issue of how do we respond to violence, right? So the HEART team is critical to provide the right response when folks are in crisis but don't need an armed officer. We also need to make sure we have officers on the streets to respond when things are dangerous. Clearly, that's important. But I also want to lift up the importance of violence interruption. As Kalila said, all this stuff violence is what happens when people don't have living wage jobs, affordable housing, parks for the kids to play in, and good schools. So we need to think about the fundamentals. There's also a couple of things we can do, and I've got a couple position papers on my website, one on community safety. So a couple of ideas that people have been talking about in Durham that I think are really important to interrupt these cycles of violence. One was lifted up at the Durham CAM meeting last week, the idea of an Office of Survivor Care within community safety. So the research shows that people who are victims of violence are often more likely to perpetrate violence themselves, right? And so the idea of an Office of Survivor Care is a single point of contact, an entry point for families of folks who have been harmed by violence or even have died in homicides, to provide them the support to break these cycles of violence. That's number one. Number two, we've got a pretty exciting pilot right now going on in Durham, providing basic income for people who return to Durham from being in prison, providing them $600 a month for a year to help them get on their feet. Finding a place to live and finding a job is tough if you've been in prison, right? I think we should think about expanding that so more people that come back to Durham from prison have that chance to get their feet on the ground, because we also know from research about 40% of folks who come back from prison reoffend. So that's an important way that we can invest as a community in interrupting these cycles of violence.
Yeah, we need to fill our vacancies. We need to pay our workers well, and that includes our emergency services workers, and we need to provide them excellent benefits. We're competing in a region. We need to provide mental health services. This is a really tough job for folks, and that's absolutely critical. And then we need to look at the root causes of violence. I support, and I think it's actually good, some of the community safety reforms that we've seen over the past several years here in the city. and I think those are important. I also think that we need to invest in things like mentorship programs, in economic development, in paying for internships and young people to do things. I think we should have the best recreation programs in the state, and that should be our goal, and make sure that kids have something to do after school, on the weekends, and all summer long. I think that those are all very, very important things. Our public safety portion of the general fund has crept up over the past 5 years from about 47% to 52%. So I do want to make sure that that we are not allowing it to creep too much higher, and prioritizing the programs that we know work outside of that. And in this, for sort of a moment of unity here, the other day at Durham Can, we did have this question about the Office of Survivor Care. And I thought it was very encouraging because every single one of the candidates said that they were in favor of an Office of Survivor Care, which happens after the crime, but recognizes that nobody wins after the crime, and it is a preventative measure, and I think a very effective one that's proven in other places. So that's something that I'm excited to get to work on with other council members if I'm elected.
Thank you so much. Well, I appreciate you all being here today. Would like to encourage you to continue to be brave and authentic, in your leadership. Durham we want that, we deserve that. And so I thank you all for your time today and look forward to continuing the conversation. Would like to reiterate our thanks to POUR, also Black Wall Street, and then of course, our sponsors, the Durham Chamber of Commerce. Thank you all.
Thank you.
I saw the note.
Thank y'all.
Real quick.
Oh.